Tonight on Newshour, Britain's migration debate has entered a new phase. In the first weeks of August, a pilot one-in, one-out scheme began between London and Paris. For every 50 asylum seekers returned to France after crossing the Channel illegally, the UK will accept 50 others from France through agreed legal channels. Now, it's intended to show control, disrupt smuggling gangs, and offer a safer route to those most in need. The scheme comes amid record high immigration figures, though net migration topped 685,000 last year, fueled by a surge in non-EU arrivals and an unprecedented rise in asylum applications. Many of those risk the world's busiest shipping lane in small boats. In those cases, despite having already succeeded in reaching the relatively safe country of France, huge numbers of people remain prepared to risk their lives to continue until they reach the UK. Many are drawn to Britain by the English language, existing family links, and the perception of better job prospects or more generous asylum decisions. Although the precise cause and effect here is something vigorously debated on all sides of the political spectrum. Critics ask why the UK cannot simply patrol its waters and turn boats back. Ministers point to maritime law obligations, the perilous tactics of smugglers, and the limits of operating in French waters without consent. The narrowness of the Channel leaves interception windows measured in minutes, and international conventions require rescuing those in distress. As this pilot then unfolds, it will be judged on whether it can meaningfully cut crossings or whether, as skeptics warn, it is too modest to put a dent in a crisis that has dominated Britain's politics for years. The UK's migration debate is not only playing out in Parliament and diplomatic meeting rooms, it's spilling onto the streets. Across the country, protests and counter-protests over asylum policy are becoming increasingly common, with police regularly called to keep rival groups apart.
Across the UK, anti-asylum protests and counter-demonstrations have become a regular feature in the migration debate, from London city streets to coastal towns such as Dover and Folkestone. Outside hotels, detention centres and sites used to house asylum seekers, opposing groups have frequently confronted each other, with police often stepping in to keep the peace. These standoffs reflect deep divisions over the government's approach to asylum policy. Rights groups argue current measures breach humanitarian principles and fail to address the root causes of migration, while nationalist factions claim they are essential for border control and public order. The dispute comes amid a sharp rise in Channel crossings. Official figures show numbers increasing from fewer than 300 in 2018 to tens of thousands annually, with year-on-year growth driven by a mix of global instability, the lure of perceived opportunities in the UK, and, according to authorities, stretches of favourable weather. In an attempt to respond, the UK and France have introduced a pilot scheme that returns some irregular migrants to France while accepting others through agreed legal channels, a strategy aimed at deterring dangerous journeys, disrupting smuggling gangs, and demonstrating joint border cooperation.
Okay, for more on this, let's cross live now to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, good to see you. Official figures suggest Channel crossings have risen by about 50% since this pilot began. What are authorities where you are saying about these numbers, and how are they explaining the trend?
Well, Guy, this is certainly an issue that seems to be more prominent in the British press than the French press, but the so-called one in, one out scheme has now come into effect. And a little bit earlier on this summer, the French Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau said this, quote, "It's a first step in addressing a challenge that requires mobilisation across the European Union. I reaffirm France's determination to stop the flow and to save lives." The way that the scheme will work is that if there are illegal immigrants who succeed in arriving to the shores of the United Kingdom on small boats, they can be sent back to France. France can then send to the United Kingdom people who satisfy British eligibility checks and security checks, who have all the necessary legal documentation and who can prove that they've not previously attempted to cross the channel on a small boat. They can then continue their legal asylum claim inside the United Kingdom. There are hopes on both sides of the channel that this new scheme can work. It was agreed and discussed during President Macron's state visit to the UK in July, and it's now come into force. There were attempts under the previous administration in the UK, under a Conservative government, to try to deal with the issue, and there are now hopes under this current Labour administration that there can be an indentation on the numbers of people trying to cross the channel. But unfortunately for the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, that unfortunate milestone of 50,000 people arriving into the UK on small boats has already been passed in the first 13 months of his premiership. Now, the way that the situation works is that there are thousands of migrants, mostly in and around the northern French port city of Calais, and they live in makeshift camps which are cleared every 48 hours by the police. They then set up a new camp that will be cleared 2 days later by the police, and they set up a new camp, and the situation is almost endless. In the middle of the night, they might receive a phone call from an unknown number telling them to go to a specific beach at a specific time, but when they get there, there might be a boat but no engine. There might be an engine and a boat but no driver. There might be not enough life jackets. There might be a boat, but it might have been deflated by the French police, and then they would be attempting to cross one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. It is very narrow. You can see the UK from France. It's only 32 kilometres away, and you can see the shores of Britain on a good day across the channel, and there have been schemes previously in place. Britain has been paying hundreds of millions of dollars to France for France to increase the beach patrols by law enforcement to try to stop the trafficking gangs from operating in that area. The people who want to get to the UK often say that they have no intention of staying in France because they have historical, cultural, family or linguistic links with the UK. People who want to come to France are often those from countries like Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal and Mali, who do have cultural, historical, family and linguistic ties to France. So there will be an attempt now for this new scheme to see if it can work, and over the coming months we will see if there can be an indentation on the numbers of people trying to cross the channel.
Ross Cullen for us there in Paris. Okay, joining me now from London is Harjap Singh Bhangal, an immigration lawyer specialising in UK asylum and migration law. Harjap, thank you very much for joining us on NewsHour. Before we start talking about the UK, we're getting news tonight of a terrible tragedy that has taken place off the Italian coast, with people losing their lives, people on one of these small boats. I just wanted to get your reaction to that, and also you are someone who is an expert on how these gangs operate, these smuggling gangs. I just wanted to get an insight into who they are and how they operate. You know, are they truly as ruthless and callous as we might think?
First of all, thank you for inviting me on. And secondly, thoughts are with the families of those, who have passed away in this horrid accident, the causes of which we can discuss. But let's remember, they do have families, the people, and they have left people behind, and there will be people grieving for them. Now, the gangs who are responsible for this, as equally and probably even more, because they profit out of this, than the people crossing, they're the ones really that need to be blamed, because they are supplying a product which is in demand, and they're creating that demand by spinning a sales pitch to these migrants. They're telling them, look, do you want to get to England? Well, yes, we do. Well, you can't claim asylum from your country anywhere while you're outside of the UK. The only way you can do it is by setting foot in the UK. And the only people that can make you set foot or can get you into the UK is us. And that the gangs have the product to do that. They then charge per person, per migrant, and they then load these people onto various methods. Before the dinghies became really operational, it was lorries. And when the UK tightened up its stance on lorries and searches on that, and with various technology, including breath detection machines, then what happened is they began to do it in dinghies and found this to be successful. And as a result, we're seeing now record numbers, people that have crossed the channel, up to 50,000, it was reported yesterday, in a year. And that is what is concerning Keir Starmer and the British public. And that's what's brought the British public out onto the streets, essentially, as well as the rhetoric surrounding this. And we have to say the media has played its part as well. The media has whipped this up with not really fact-checking anything, the rhetoric and the words used, such as invasion and swarm. And as a result, we now have, sort of conflict almost on the streets.
It's very interesting, Harjap, isn't it? When you look at the UK and you look at, as you say, at the rhetoric, very hard to take the politics out of it. But there's definitely been this polarising effect, hasn't there, where on the one hand, you have one group of people that say this is an invasion, this is terrible, our country's being overrun. On the other hand, you have a group of people saying that any questioning at all of immigration, any limiting at all of immigration is a terrible and bigoted approach to take. And it seems very difficult at the moment to have a nuanced problem-solving approach in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been of the opinion that the policy should be firm but fair. I think that's sort of the stance that we need to take on this. What the people, anti-immigration people are doing are painting everyone who comes over as criminals, as sexual offenders, potential rapists, using slogans like "Save Our Women," despite the fact that most offences against British women are carried out by British people and mainly by family members. So that hasn't been fact-checked. Then you have groups on the far left who are also saying, well, hold on, there shouldn't be borders at all. And we should help everyone who comes to us, and we should house them and feed them. And I think the thing is that optics are not looking good to the British public. So where these people are being housed in hotels, which a normal person or a British citizen would have to pay £120 or so a night to stay in, and where we're seeing asylum seekers getting essentially free accommodation while their cases are being heard, that does not look good. But however, if we look into that, that's not the fault of the asylum seeker. So what do you expect them to do? Because asylum seekers are not allowed to work while their applications are pending. So essentially, you've got lots of people who've made an application who are waiting sometimes up to 2 years just for a yes or no, and they're not allowed to work. And therefore, they're a responsibility of the host nation. And the nation must then accommodate them, must feed them as per the law. And this is where the people sort of don't seem to understand. And the letdown here isn't from the asylum seekers or the British public. The letdown is the Home Office, which is not fit for purpose. It should take around about a day to make a decision on an asylum claim. Why it takes the Home Office 2 years is because it's an institution not fit for purpose. We know this because in Parliament every year there's a Home Affairs Select Committee report, and they tell us, the MPs tell us themselves, that this institution we have called the Home Office is not good enough. So if you have a factory and the machinery is all busted, you're not going to get a good product at the end of the day. And as a result, the backlog piles up and the number of asylum seekers roaming about in the UK increases. It's similar, Guy, to saying that if someone takes their GCSEs this summer or A-levels exams, and we say to them, well, we can't give you a result yet, we'll have to wait 2 years for your results, and in the meantime, you can't go to university either. What do you think is going to happen? You're going to end up pile up of kids with nothing to do, and of course there's going to be mischief on the streets.
And what's your assessment of Keir Starmer's handling of this so far? I mean, you mentioned some of the optics not playing particularly well. Has he made some mistakes, or is this just incredibly difficult for any leader, any politician to actually completely navigate their way through?
I think he came in on a very sticky wicket. The previous government just piled it up and ignored immigration as an issue. And we saw the result of that when they got voted out. And I think what he inherited was a broken system. No experts in charge, no specialist advice as how to deal with it. He's a lawyer himself, he's a barrister. So he knows the law and he knows the human rights procedure, he knows the appeal processes. But it doesn't matter how much you know, if your whole production machinery or your machinery, you could be the best tradesman in the world. If your tools are all busted, you're not going to end up producing anything. So now I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to do everything he can. So he's grabbing every opportunity he can to try and break the models. That includes going after the gangs, setting up task force, meeting up with European counterparts and saying, well, let's stop these gangs at the source. The one in, one out scheme recently, which has been announced, doing return deals with more countries, speeding up appeal processes. They've just been cut down half the time, recruiting more immigration judges, putting more money into the Home Office, and adding more countries to a list where you can deport first and appeal later, including India recently, which has just been added in the past few days. So every trade deal that's conducted with a country comes with an immigration clause, because the previous government, when they negotiated the Brexit treaty, they didn't negotiate any return deals. Up until last year, or the year before, we only had return deals with 6 countries. Now you can't send people back to countries if you haven't got a returns deal. So it's a big, big failing on the previous government, and it's a big mess for Keir Starmer to clean up. And now the people who created that mess and are out of government are actually pointing fingers at Keir Starmer when it's their mess he's cleaning up, essentially.
And what did you say? One of the things that the Prime Minister was very focused on, very vocal about, was this idea of smashing the gangs. Who are these gangs? I mean, is this the sort of typical organised crime group that maybe has spent years dealing in narcotics and other things, and now has diversified into people smuggling, or are these bespoke outfits that have been set up just to focus on, as you say, pitching this idea to people? Is there a typical profile, and where are they? Where are they typically based?
Okay, so these people gangs are very, very slick. Now, your viewers will be quite shocked to hear that there's more money made in people smuggling than there is in drug smuggling. That's a fact. Wow. And you always hear about war on drug smuggling gangs. And, you see TV programs about it. You see slogans about it. You hear about drug dealers caught and sentenced to life. You hear about military ops, about having these people taken out. However, you never hear about a war on people smugglers. Yet, and there's more money made in people smuggling. But these gangs are sophisticated. They employ people, just like mafia gangs would, as buffers to operate for them. The actual heads live in countries where there's non-extradition, so it's hard to get them. And what you have is people who are in the chain who are easily replaceable. They literally scour and advertise on social media and at shores, even at countries at the source, and promise people the world. These are the gangs, and what they do is they'll collect a fee or they'll agree a fee. Sometimes they're so sophisticated, and Chinese gangs are notorious for this, they will hold family members hostage until the payment is complete. And once a person lands in the UK, then they'll ask for the rest of the payment, and after taking a deposit. And it's a chain that doesn't end. They're always ahead of Europol, ahead of Interpol, ahead of all the border force. And they're always about 50, 60 steps ahead, despite using the same route for the past 20 years. Now, since I've been watching these gangs, they've been using Calais to Dover, or the Kent coast, from that French coast. Now, I find it incredible, and I find it totally, the fact that unbelievable, that the British government and the European governments know the route used by these gangs for 20 years, know who these people are, and yet cannot find them, are saying, well, sorry, we just can't find them, they're too clever for us. It's almost like saying there's a bus driver who's driven the same bus for 20 years from A to B. And yet when asked, do you know who the bus driver is? Can you get him? sorry, sir, he's too quick for us. We don't know anything about him. So what needs to happen is that this government needs, Keir Starmer's right, the gangs do need to be stopped and smashed. However, what the governments need to realize that they need to come together and they need to get their elite units onto this and smash these gangs. So if we can find bin Laden holed up in Pakistan and pick him up and, from the eyes of the world, or we can go after Gaddafi in his stronghold or Saddam Hussein and get him in his stronghold and put him on trial. Are we really trying to say that we have no elite units who can get these people smugglers? That people find hard to believe, and maybe that needs to be explored, but that can't happen without all of the countries cooperating with each other.
And it's very interesting you say that. So, if we were to deploy special forces, intelligence services in the way you've described, I mean, it's a very coherent argument that would deal with one side of this. But what about the demand side of the problem? And one of the things that anti-immigration voices always cry out about is, why are people coming from a safe country of France risking their lives to go to another safe country of the UK? And that debate then becomes quite a polarised and political one. But there must be some practical reasons why someone would be so driven to make the move from one safe country to another.
Well, first of all, people have got to understand that it's not a requirement that you have to claim asylum in the first safe country you come across. And so the law says you can claim asylum in any country that you want to, and that country has to entertain your claim. Before, Britain had something called a Dublin Agreement when it was in the EU. And if someone had claimed asylum already in the EU, then Britain could return those people. It wasn't used that much, but it was still used and it was there. Could return them people to the country where they had claimed asylum, because that country would have responsibility to it. With the advent of Brexit, that also has gone. But what's you've got to understand is that every country in the EU has to share its fair share of asylum seekers. Otherwise, the system would collapse. If we said that people crossing the border into Austria have to claim, or from the Slovak Republic have to claim asylum there, Austria would be overloaded. If we use that same argument of why can't people stay in the first safe country they cross to, the Jews would have never got to America, to the safe haven there. So what people now, why people want to come to the UK is for a lot of reasons. One, colonial ties. So the UK, you've got to understand, has ruled about 60% of the world, be it America, be it in Africa, be it in India, be it in Asia, be it in Australia. And they've imposed their language on everybody and their way of life, even their laws. So a lot of the Indian legal system is based on the UK system, and including the courts and the laws there. So what happens is people want to go to somewhere where they're more familiar with, where they feel safe. So essentially they look for language skills, job opportunities, somewhere where there's already existing communities there, somewhere where they may have friends and relatives. And the UK is such a place. Like you mentioned earlier, that people from the former French colonies feel safe in France. People from former Spanish colonies feel safe in Spain because of familiarity. But people from former British colonies would rather come to the UK. And also they know that the UK has got one of the best human rights records in the world. So they'll feel safe there. And that is essentially why people are coming. The argument which people on the right use is, oh, well, they're coming for benefits and facilities. Well, the fact is they don't get any cash asylum seekers. They're not allowed to work. They get the equivalent of about £7 a day, around about £50 a week to survive. Now, if you live in London or if you live in England, that doesn't even buy you a croissant and a coffee for the whole day. And then they get accommodation until their claim is decided. The problem is it takes so long for their claim to be decided that this is taking years. At one stage, there was over 90,000 people waiting up to 2 years for a decision on their cases. So during that time, they're housed and the optics don't look good. People think they're getting free facilities for nothing. And people see them, they're just sitting around outside cafes. Well, what do you expect them to do? You won't let them work. You won't give them any permission to work. They don't get national insurance numbers. They can't claim benefits as such. That needs to be fact-checked. So that is one of the reasons why people want to come to the UK, many reasons why people want to come to the UK, but also dispels a few myths about what other groups and what other sides of the argument say that people are coming. If people are not coming for your free benefits, they're not even allowed to work, and they're not given cash, and they're not coming to stay in a hotel. The fact is they're coming for familiarity. And the gangs are selling that as a point as well. The gangs say, well, hold on, claim asylum in the UK. It takes them 2 years to decide your claim. Until then, they can't send you back. You don't want to go anywhere where there's a fast track system where they decide your case in 10, 15 days, because then you'll be out of that country and back home. So you want to go somewhere where there's a dysfunctioning immigration administration. And that is the UK. And the UK is right up there at the top. This is why Keir Starmer has now announced, and Yvette Cooper has now announced, there's going to be a fast-track system as well, where asylum cases may be decided within 28 days. They used to have a fast-track system under Labour, under the Labour government before 2010. So Labour has got form on this. And net migration is increasing, or has increased over the years under the Conservatives. But that wasn't due to asylum seekers. That was due to a number of work permits issued by Rishi Sunak's government. And a lot of them were issued to Africans, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankans. And, that allowed people to come here legally and to work in jobs legally. And that was creating huge, levels of migrations, up to about the numbers that you mentioned earlier, 700,000 odd.
Harjap, it's a very, very interesting point that you make about the colonial context and the strength of the community connection. Finally, I just want to ask you about those communities. Is the concern in some of those existing communities in the UK about this scheme? And you're a lawyer, are there safeguards that possibly we might need to look at just to make sure that this doesn't cause undue problems for people who are already safely on their way to becoming a UK citizen?
Well, what we have, if we're talking about the one in, one out scheme, there are sort of issues around that. We're saying, well, hold on, is it really going to be a deterrent if you're just in essence sending 50 back and getting 50 more migrants back, albeit they can come here legally or meant to qualify? It's meant to act as a deterrent. It's meant to say to the gangs, if you send people here illegally, we're going to send them right back your way. Then your customers won't be happy. They'll be demanding refunds. They'll be reporting you to the police and authorities, and they'll get more information on them. So that's sort of the idea there. There are concerns for people already in existing communities, especially with the changes to the recent work permit schemes, where they're going to make it tougher. They've removed 100 jobs from the current work permit lists. Their students can no longer bring their spouses over. A lot of work permit holders cannot bring their spouses over, including care workers, can't bring their family over, which they see as ironic considering they've been brought here to look after British people's elderly parents. And now, in turn, they can't even call their own wife and children over. And, they're expected to look after other people's ill relatives, but, not able to look after their own. So there are definitely concerns in communities. There's also concerns in communities at the rising number of crime. Now, if I can give you a statistic, 50% of British Asians voted for Brexit on the fact that there was too much immigration, despite being initially immigrants themselves. So there is sort of tension between their communities, especially those who have been here since the 1970s and 80s, and those coming recently, as they see this sort of failure to integrate and a more potential for crime, even if they're not backed up by statistics. But there seems to be that from what we've heard. And a lot of lawyers and human rights groups are saying, well, hold on, if we really want to stop the gangs, why has no one taken up France's offer and made an offshore processing centre? France offered this government, the UK government, and when Priti Patel was Foreign Secretary, that you can open up a processing centre and France will provide the land for it and the infrastructure for it. The UK turned it down. So an offshore processing centre would dent, to some extent, the gang selling point. Because why would you want to cross the ocean on a tricky journey, risk death with your family and claim asylum when you can walk into a centre and claim it for free? Now, so that is something the government has to think about. And a lot of people, including myself, have called for and to counteract the gangs. But there is no one solution to this, as often is heard. It's got to be a mixture of stuff, and it needs cooperation all around Europe. UK are not going to be able to do this on its own without the help of all of the EU. It's something the EU has to really sit down together and consider as a bloc.
Harjap, thank you so much for your analysis, for joining us on Newshour there from London. Okay, the pilot scheme's success then will be measured not on just numbers, but also whether it can ease political tensions and disrupt the dangerous trade in channel crossings. For now, it's a cautious step in a long-running and divisive debate. That's all for this edition of Newshour from all of us here at AnewZ. Thanks for being with us.